A warm welcome, and I'm going to be your host, your moderator. My name is Lalita Ramamurthy, and I am one of the directors at VaYU Shakti, the yoga and nutrition-based holistic wellness organization. I have with me two of my colleagues, Saurabh Srivatsava and Ramki Ramakrishnan, as well to conduct this webinar. It is with great pleasure that we welcome you all to this International Day of Yoga event organized by VaYU Shakti in collaboration with New York City Agency Department for the Aging. We are very grateful to DFTA for supporting us in bringing this event to all of you. And as we all know, we have been passing through some very challenging times, especially for the last 2.5 years, as the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the way of life for many of us. It has forced us to spend our time inside our houses, feel isolated sometimes, away from our loved ones, away from our usual activities, and also away from a lot of social gathering. And all this has had a great impact on our physical, mental, emotional, social, and spiritual health for people. No demographic has felt this change more severely than the older adult population, and even more so big in a densely populated metropolis like New York City. As the challenge rises, so does the human spirit to solve it. And one such very vital solution or path is through yoga. Yoga, not just a mindless physical exercise, but yoga in its true form of incorporating all the 8 limbs of it. We have with us one of the most renowned experts on research in yoga, and we would hear from him today about the scientific evidence supporting the applicability of yoga to address the major health concerns of current times. I request all our attendees to take notes as the Dr. Khalsa, who is our guest speaker today, goes through his presentation, and the input for your questions will be put in the chat box. We have some questions also collected from various email responses that we have received that we will also have put through the chat. And we've set aside ample time for our Q&A, so stay tuned, please. Dr. Khalsa needs no introduction as one of the most celebrated yoga experts of our times. And if I may say so, and definitely needs no introduction once again, as I said, still for the sake of brevity, let me take a couple of moments and try my best to summarize as many of his achievements and awards as I may possibly can. This is certainly going to be a test to my speaking speed. Dr. Khalsa is a researcher in the field of body-mind medicine, specializing in yoga therapy. Specifically, he is interested in the evolution of the clinical effectiveness and basic psychophysiological mechanisms underlying the practice of yoga and meditation techniques. He has practiced yoga as a lifestyle since 1972 and is a certified instructor in Kundalini Yoga. He is an associate professor of medicine at the Harvard Medical School. His other positions and titles include Associate Neuroscientist, Division of Sleep and Circadian Disorders, Departments of Medicine and Neurology, Brigham and Women's Hospital, Research Associate at the Benson Henry Institute for Mind-Body Medicine, Research Affiliate of the Osher Center for Integrative Medicine, Director of Yoga Research for the Yoga Alliance and the Kundalini Research Institute. My God, that was definitely a mouthful, but I have only given a very short snippet of Dr. Khalsa's introduction. For more than a decade, Dr. Khalsa has conducted clinical research, trials evaluating yoga treatments for insomnia, addiction, back pain, anxiety disorders, post-traumatic stress disorders, and chronic stress, and also operated a yoga program in public schools to determine benefits in mental health in adolescents. And with that short introduction, I will now pass on the floor to Dr. Khalsa. Dr. Khalsa, once again, welcome on board, sir. We're looking forward to a great interactive presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here with you all. And I'm hoping to share with you some of the science and the research that we have behind how yoga works and its particular relevance and the research associated with the benefits of yoga in elderly populations. So let's start with the word yoga. And as Lalita mentioned, yoga certainly is known for its postures and exercises, which is the most visible component of yoga practice. And some of these postures are demonstrated here. However, traditional yoga incorporates other practices. This includes the breathing exercises, deep relaxation, physical relaxation, and very importantly, meditation. These are all integral parts of a complete yoga intervention. Now, if we're talking about yoga for the elderly, as you can imagine, a lot of these postures may not be relevant. And what we would more expect to see with respect to yoga for the elderly is pictured here. This top left figure is really known and recognized as what we now call chair yoga. The ability for practitioners to engage in supported practices of limited flexibility. And yet these are still very, very beneficial in terms of the postures and exercises that are done. Yoga's popularity is growing dramatically in the United States. These are federal government surveys of the practice of yoga by US adults in the past year. And what you can see is this remarkable increase over the course of the past 15, 20 years. This is almost an exponential increase, and the next survey is due 2022, and so we could well be at 20% of the population that has been actively practicing yoga. In terms of the elderly, the population is less than a younger population. So the younger population really dominates the practice of yoga. According to this survey in 2017, it's about 7% of the elderly. A recent paper summarizing a lot of these surveys that have been done every 5 years really gives us a more accurate description of the breakdown in terms of age. And one thing you can see again is it's really dominated by the younger ages from 18 to 64. And what you can also see moving across time from 2007 to 12 to 17, the increase in that prevalence growing. And looking at the statistics from 65 to 74, you can see it was only 1.8% in 2002 and grown up to 8.6%. So a very dramatic increase. And also for participants who are 75 or older, very little in 2002 and almost 4% in 2017. So the popularity of yoga is growing across all ages, including the elderly. That popularity is manifested into a whole movement of yoga for the elderly, and as a consequence, we see many books. This is just a sample of books, book covers pulled off of Amazon: Yoga for Seniors, Age Without Limits, Chair Yoga for Seniors and Beginners, Chair Yoga, again, Chair Yoga, Chair Yoga, and Chair Yoga. So really, when we talk about yoga for the elderly, we're really talking primarily about chair yoga, but that doesn't mean, of course, that as the elderly engage in yoga practice, they can't move on to more intense practices, which some who don't have limitations may be able to do. So just to talk about the psychophysiology of yoga, there's a whole body of research now that's allowing us to give an understanding of how yoga works. And this is actually manifested in a lot of reviews and meta-analyses that are published summarizing the mechanisms of yoga. And this is just a sample of these published papers. The one on the top on how yoga reduces stress, this paper on immune system functioning, this paper on neurophysiological and neurocognitive mechanisms, stress again, and potential self-regulatory mechanisms of yoga for psychological health. We've also summarized this research on the psychophysiology in our medical textbook, The Principles and Practice of Yoga in Healthcare, in a chapter on the research on the psychophysiology of yoga. And although I don't have time to go through all the individual types of studies that have contributed to our base of knowledge, I can summarize this in a logic model, which really gives us a full description of how yoga is working and the research behind that. So yoga, as I've said, is not just the postures and exercises, which are certainly there. It is also mostly practiced together with breathing, with physical relaxation, and very importantly, with the meditative component. Now, what we know is that each one of these practices, each one of these 4 practices alone, has an effect on the physical body in a box that I'm referring to as fitness. And certainly when they're all together in yoga, they're much more influential. And we can measure things, and these things have been measured in terms of taking naive individuals in research studies, giving them these practices, and we see changes in flexibility, strength, coordination, and balance, in respiratory function. And through the mind-body connection, that leads to an overall self-efficacy. It is also through all 4 of these practices, either by themselves or together in traditional yoga, that we see a major change in the ability to self-regulate internal state, the ability to exert some control over our psychological and physical functioning. And then most important areas of self-regulation are really with respect to stress and emotion regulation, which over time with regular practice leads to these characteristics and strengths of resilience and tolerance to stress and emotional equanimity. And that leads to an overall psychological self-efficacy. Now, it's primarily through the meditative component that we see changes in mind-body awareness. Meditation, most simply defined, is the relaxed, non-analytical focus of attention. And when you do that consistently over time, you engage the attention networks in the prefrontal cortex in the brain, and that improves your ability to attend, to pay attention. And over time, that leads to changes in mind-body awareness. You become more sensitive. And mind-body awareness is also known very popularly as mindfulness. And that improvement in the attention networks improves cognitive functioning and concentration. And over time, with regular practice, practitioners come to a state we call metacognition. The understanding and the realization that although we have thought processes, we have the ability to self-regulate those thought processes. We are not our thoughts because we are able to stand above those thoughts and change our reactivity to those thoughts, and even if we desire to change those thought patterns at will. And that's a very significant factor in the long-term benefits of meditative practice. And metacognition actually is also the underlying principle behind the most common and most powerful form of psychotherapy today, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. So yoga and meditation practices share this very important construct, which is very important in terms of its ability to change and improve mental health and to actually treat mental health conditions. Now, it is also through the meditative component, and again, typically with regular practice, and in this case, over a longer period of time, that people will start to experience these deep contemplative states, these unitive states, experiences of transcendence, of the flow state. And these brief experiences are so powerful that they will lead people to a deeper transformation in their lives, increase their sense of life meaning and purpose. And in this box, I'm referring to this as pure spirituality. Now, one thing you can see from this model is we're making changes across a broad spectrum of human functioning, from the gross levels of physical fitness, muscle tissue, and connective tissue, to the deepest experiences that humans can have. And so as a consequence, we can see this change in sort of global human functionality. And we have very strong objective research to support all of these findings in terms of its effects on physical functioning. And over the past 2 to 3 decades, through very powerful scientific techniques such as molecular biology, neuroimaging of brain functioning, and biochemical research, we're starting to get a really understanding of the neuroscience underlying self-regulation and mind-body awareness. And these are very critical in changing very important aspects of behavior and functioning. And the weak sister in terms of research is actually spirituality, but it is possible to conduct this research. And one example is that we know that long-term yoga practitioners do experience improvements in their spirituality. So overall, we're seeing these changes in global human functionality with regular yoga practice, from the gross level of physical and mental health and performance, to the deeper skills of stress and emotion regulation, improvements in awareness, mindfulness, and the induction of this metacognitive state. And ultimately, over time, this improves mental health to a higher degree where we see changes in positive psychology, things like positive behaviors, well-being, values, life purpose and meaning, and what we can refer to as spirituality. Now, if you're involved in the field of aging and treatment of the elderly, of course, a lot of these factors have enormous relevance for this population. And we can look at the aging consequences and challenges that are faced by our elderly population. Aging is associated with a general diminution in most psychological and physical functioning. That's just a fact of aging. Everything starts to deteriorate. There's a decline in brain function and structure. There's risk for cognitive decline, memory deterioration, and the risk factors for development of depression and anxiety. There's also bone shrinkage in size and density, which leads to risk of fracture, loss of muscle strength, endurance, and flexibility, which leads to a risk of falls and balance impairment, which can then lead to other problems. There's a stiffening of blood vessels and arteries, which leads to increased risk of hypertension and cardiovascular disease. There's reduced immune function. The risk for infection, diseases, and cancer is increased. There's a weakened sleep integrity, which elevates the risk for insomnia. There's structural changes in the intestines, the bladder and prostate, risk for constipation, weekend or frequent urination and incontinence, declines in vision, hearing, skin integrity, sexual health and metabolism, and an overall increase in stress and a fall in well-being and overall quality of life. So this is a very long laundry list. But as you can have seen from the logic model, a lot of the facets that yoga improves are actually targeted at a lot of these potential negative consequences and challenges in aging. Now, we've actually summarized this in our chapter in our book, The Principles and Practice of Yoga and Healthcare, in our chapter on yoga therapy for pediatrics, which summarizes a lot of the research that's been done on yoga in the elderly and in conditions which are associated with the elderly. But I'm going to take you through some of the research evidence now to some degree, just to give you a sense of what's been established. So on the physical level, in terms of the physical fitness component, and we're talking about things like bone structure and falls and balance here. There's a number of review papers that have already been published summarizing the research that's been done. This paper in 2014 looked at the comparative impacts of Tai Chi balance training and specially designed yoga program on balance in older fallers. And what they found was that yoga was as effective in Tai Chi and standard balance training for improving postural stability and may offer an alternative to more traditional programs. This is a randomized controlled trial showing that yoga is pretty much as good as stretching. And what they concluded in this study was that overall we've observed significant time effects for each of the balance, flexibility, strength, and mobility measures, indicating that both groups improved, and Hatha Yoga was just as effective as the conventional Center for Disease Control strengthening guidelines in improving these functional fitness outcomes in community-dwelling older adults. These findings have important clinical implications, as yoga may serve as an alternate form of physical activity for individuals who may be unable to perform stretching and strengthening exercises using resistance bands or free weights. The gentle and modifiable nature of practically all Hatha Yoga postures promises to be a well-received, safe, and enjoyable exercise that is easy to adopt and maintain for older adults. And this review and meta-analysis summarized a number of papers and concluded that it provides preliminary evidence that balance and mobility can be safely improved with participation in yoga by people aged 60 and over. Physical yoga warrants investigation as a potential intervention to prevent falls in older age. This is another review and meta-analysis in which was published in 2019. They concluded that yoga interventions improve multiple physical functioning and health quality of life related outcomes in this population. This study provides robust evidence for promoting yoga in physical activity guidelines for older adults as a multimodal activity that improves aspects of fitness like strength, balance, and flexibility, as well as mental well-being. And just to show you just a couple of individual research trials, this was a pilot randomized controlled trial of the effects of chair yoga on pain and physical function among community dwelling older adults. And you can see that the yoga group here is in the solid line, showing reductions in pain compared to the health education control condition in terms of the WOMAC pain score also showing declines, physical functioning score, balance scores showing improvement in the yoga substantially compared to the health education training. Gait speed, which is an important metric of mobility and locomotion in terms of walking ability, was improved with yoga, and as well as fatigue. And this is actually an interesting study because it went into depth into the whole idea of gait patterning, which is very important in terms of walking, and it really underlies the mechanism of balance and locomotion. And what they found in this study was that gait initiation parameters may be sensitive indicators of balance dysfunction and the risk of falls in older adults. Our results suggest that the neuroadaptation related to yoga performance can modify leg muscle pattern during gait initiation. So yoga is working really at fundamental levels of physiological functioning to make improvements in these phenomena. So yoga is really working at the mechanistic level, not just as a symptom treatment, but actually at the mechanistic level to change behavior and functioning in the elderly. Now, of course, cognition is a major issue in elderly, particularly cognitive decline. This is one of the tragedies of aging and disorders like cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease, because in the golden years of their lives, they're denied something which is really critical to human functioning. This caption reads, "My memory is so bad. How bad is it? How bad is what?" And of course, memory decline is one of the aspects of cognition that does decline in aging. And there are reviews studying the effects of mind-body practices and yoga as well in mental health and cognitive functioning. This review paper published in 2018 reported that a growing body of research supports the use of mind-body therapies as minimally invasive and effective approaches for the management of late-life mood and cognitive disorders. In fact, they actually concluded that practitioners may recommend mind-body therapies as holistic, effective approaches for the management of common late-life mood and cognitive disorders. And this is another systematic review and meta-analysis of the effects of mind-body exercises, including yoga. A regular large number of studies with fair to good methodological quality have been conducted to evaluate the efficacy of mind-body exercise on cognitive functions among elderly. The findings from this review generally suggest that mind-body exercise could be safe and effective in enhancing cognitive function for people aged 60 years or older. This is an interesting study in which they looked at long-term practitioners of meditation and long-term practitioners of yoga. And they compared this to a control population that did not practice yoga or meditation. And what they were studying here was the decline with age in what is called fluid intelligence. This is a high-level cognitive function. It's the general ability to think abstractly, reason, identify patterns, solve problems, and discern relationships. So it's a high-level executive function, which is really treasured and really an important feature of being a human being. And what you can see in the general population, which is this solid line, is the general decline that is well known in fluid intelligence with the aging population. And what you can see here is the dashed lines are the yogis and the meditators. And what's happening here is a resistance to this decline in fluid intelligence. And the authors of the study concluded that these findings reveal the possibility to increase resilience and to slow the decline of fluid intelligence and brain functional architecture, and suggest that mindfulness plays a mechanistic role in this preservation. And this is another study that really looked at underlying mechanisms. This was an EEG study looking at long-term yoga practitioners who were elderly. And what they found in this study was that elderly women with at least 8 years of yoga practices presented greater intranetwork anterior-posterior brain functional connectivity of the default mode network. This finding may contribute to the understanding of the influences of practicing yoga for a healthier cognitive aging process. So again, yoga seems to be working really at the mechanistic level, at the cellular molecular level, to maintain and promote health and wellness of neural tissue. And this is a study conducted at UCLA by my colleague Helen Lavretsky, who's been studying a yoga meditation-based intervention. And what they found was that the yoga group in this study demonstrated a statistically significant improvement in depression and visuospatial memory. We observed improved verbal memory performance correlated with increased connectivity. The yoga meditation and memory enhancement training were both as effective in improving memory functions, namely memory recall, and functional connectivity related to verbal, attentional, and self-regulatory performance. And then this is another trial from Ed McCauley's group, who's been doing work in this area for a number of years. And in this trial looking at processing speed in older adults in a randomized controlled trial, they found that yoga practice that includes postures, breathing, and meditative exercises led to improved attentional and information processing abilities. The 8-week yoga intervention had positive effects on attention and processing speed capacity when compared with stretching and strengthening exercises for healthy but sedentary older adults. Now, turning our attention to mental health, especially mood disorders, this has been reviewed back in 2011 in a paper in the International Journal of Yoga Therapy, in which they summarized the benefits to that date in things like the increased ability to maintain daily activities of living, increased self-efficacy, reduced levels of stress, anxiety, anger, and depression, increased self-control over thoughts and emotions, improved sleep quality, reduced levels of pain, and opportunities for self-reflection and spiritual inquiry. And this is actually a systematic review which presents a statistical analysis of papers published in older adults with yoga interventions. And in this plot, anything to the right of this solid black line here, as portrayed in the dashed red line, indicates an overall improvement in these studies that have been done in the elderly, suggesting that there are improvements in health-related quality of life with yoga in a general way. This is another review, and this looked at the effects of yoga on various health-related problems. In this review, they concluded that regular practice of yoga can be considered as an effective intervention in improving mental and depression and anxiety, emotional, anger, stress, tension, and self-efficacy planes of elderly individuals, offering a better quality of sleep and quality of life. In terms of individual studies, one of the key factors we like to see is this whole idea of self-regulation of stress, which manifests as changes in perceived stress. So this is a study in healthy elderly individuals in which a yoga intervention was able to reduce scores on the perceived stress scale in a statistically significant way. And again, in stress in the elderly, this time looking at objective measures of stress, they were able to look at cortisol concentration and secretion rate. And what you can see is statistically significant declines in this level of this stress hormone in the yoga intervention compared to the control intervention, which had little change. And then finally, sleep is really a very sensitive metric of overall health, and sleep is well known to decline with aging. And so we do have a number of papers that have been published looking at meditative movement interventions on quality of sleep in the elderly. Again, this is a statistical analysis looking at multiple publications. And what they found in terms of improvements in sleep quality is that it favored the yoga group in virtually all of those studies. And the overall average did show this favoring of quality of sleep. This is another paper. This paper looked at the quality of life in long-term yoga practitioners who were elderly. And what they found was that older adults practicing yoga regularly had better overall sleep quality, less episodes of disturbed sleep, took less time to fall asleep, had less daytime dysfunction, they exhibited less use of sleep medications, and also felt more rested and energetic in the morning. And on the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index, which is a good measure of sleep, we usually see improvements in the yoga group in these trials. This is also a survey of yoga practitioners looking at the mental and physical health benefits. Age, and they analyzed age in this particular study. Age also behaved in an interesting manner in this population. While older individuals commonly experience higher rates of fatigue and sleep disturbances, no such relationship existed in this population of yoga practitioners. Sleep disturbance was unrelated to age, and fatigue levels significantly actually decreased with age, suggesting that long-term yoga practitioners are really engaging in a practice which is able to maintain their functioning with respect to sleep. This is an individual trial looking at elderly in assisted living facilities. After 6 months of performing yoga exercises, participants' overall sleep quality had significantly improved, whereas depression, sleep disturbances, and daytime dysfunction had decreased significantly. It is recommended that yoga exercise be incorporated as an activity program in assisted living facilities or in other long-term care facilities to improve sleep quality and decrease depression in institutionalized elders. And finally, this is a randomized controlled trial conducted by my colleague Shirley Tellis in India with the elderly, and they used a yoga intervention and looked at two metrics of sleep. One is the time taken to fall asleep, or sleep onset latency, and you can see that reducing in the yoga group, which is in the black bars, whereas the controls that did not practice had no change in the time taken to fall asleep. In terms of sleep duration, which is a very important metric, you can see that the yoga group increases in total sleep duration over the course of the intervention, whereas the control group had no change over time. And sleep is a very, very important outcome because sleep has then impacts on many functioning. It impacts glucose regulation, it impacts mood state, it impacts cognitive functioning. So the whole idea of being able to improve sleep quality not only improves quality of life, but it also improves the decrement that is ordinarily seen with sleep disturbances. So I work very closely with the International Association of Yoga Therapists, which is a whole movement, this whole idea of yoga therapy, using yoga as a treatment for many medical conditions. And a good subset of yoga therapists are specializing in yoga for the elderly and yoga for conditions which frequent the elderly. I also serve as the Director of Research for the Kundalini Research Institute, which supports the style of yoga that I practice. I'm also the Director of Yoga Research for the Yoga Alliance. And my goal as their research director is really to promote and educate the public, yoga practitioners, teachers, and clinical practitioners about the science and research behind yoga. So towards that, we have a number of professionally prepared yoga research videos on summarizing the research done on yoga in a number of different areas, including the elderly. We've got a number of research webinars, also including a couple of them devoted to effects on the elderly. And we also curate a whole collection of reprints that are easily accessible, broken down into a number of different categories, and the elderly and aging is one of those categories. So if you click on that link, you can then go and see which papers are available, review papers summarizing the studies that have been done on yoga for the elderly. And in many cases, we have the full links to those publications. And we've also highlighted individual studies of note that have produced significant results in trials of yoga in the elderly. And I close with this cartoon. And what we're experiencing in modern society is really an epidemic of so-called non-communicable diseases. These are lifestyle diseases. These are due to risk factors like low levels of physical activity, poor dietary choices, dysfunctional health behaviors like excessive alcohol consumption and smoking, as well as an unmanaged burden of chronic stress. And these are leading to these non-communicable diseases, which represent 90% of all deaths in the US. So this is far beyond COVID. This is really the dominant impairment in modern society. And the elderly, of course, are much more predisposed and much weaker in terms of being able to resist these types of non-communicable diseases. And unfortunately, our society is really focused on symptom treatment in the medical system, which really doesn't address the underlying behavioral problems which are responsible for these disorders and these behavioral patterns which can be reversed and therefore reduce the symptoms of these diseases. So by implementing yoga as a preventive strategy, both in our public schools as well as in our workplaces and even for the elderly, I think can go a long way for preventing the appearance of these non-communicable diseases, which are so impairing in terms of quality of life and wellness. And so once we have the research evidence, which is really critical to convince insurers and medical providers of the efficacy of yoga, we can then hope to possibly reverse this tide of this epidemic of non-communicable disease and change this cartoon from this to a more positive outcome. So thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Dr. Khalsa. I think this was, a very intense, full-on data, a lot of information, but I think it was also very entertaining, especially the last cartoon that you showed. I really appreciate you doing that. I've listened to you many times in past. I have read your articles, but every time I listen to you, I learn something new. And, that was true for today as well. And I'm sure the audience probably found your talk as informative and as thought-provoking as I did as well. So, I know that some of the questions are coming in the chat. A lot of questions were, received through emails as well, in the run-up to this talk. So if it is okay, I would like to get into the formal Q&A session right now. I would also like to invite Ramki, the CEO of VaYU Shakti, so that he can answer some of the questions related to VaYU Shakti. One question, maybe a little bit towards the lighter side, but Yelitsa has asked that she finds it very difficult to sleep sometimes, and she hears to the meditation music. She does not have a television in the bedroom, so she's definitely trying to reduce the distractions there. But she's saying that I've heard that getting a lavender plant is good. Is that true?
Well, there are a number of natural herbal approaches to insomnia and sleep disturbance that are there. I don't think that they're that strong, especially if you have a severe insomnia problem. And I think one of the underlying factors that really contributes to sleep disturbance is the level of chronic stress. Because chronic stress and anxiety are essentially activating the brain regions that are involved, that are necessarily need to quiet down sufficiently for you to able to fall asleep and stay asleep. And those are both problems: falling asleep, sleep onset insomnia, and staying asleep, sleep maintenance insomnia. And a very common problem in the elderly is actually early morning awakenings. The elderly will often wake up 1 or 2 hours earlier than they intended and cannot seem to fall back asleep. And a lot of this may well be due to the higher level activation of the stress response systems in the body. The body is sort of jacked up in terms of its psychophysiological levels of arousal. And the way to counter this is to reduce that overall level of arousal. And that's exactly what yoga is extremely good at, in reducing arousal. And I can tell you that one of the most common anecdotes that we get from individuals who've begun a yoga practice is, my sleep got better. I'm sleeping longer, I'm sleeping deeper, and I'm enjoying my sleep. It's more satisfying. And that is a very common outcome that we hear when people begin a yoga practice. And we've actually conducted clinical trials of yoga for insomnia and found that the benefits that we see are just as strong as the most strong prescription pharmaceutical can provide.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Khalsa. Yelitza, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you asking that question. I see Rosemary has her hands up. Rosemary, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, please do.
Yes, hi, good morning, and thank you for this. Very interesting. And perhaps I'll just jump to the end of the presentation. I'd like to know how to have a regular, convenient yoga instructed class on the computer.
So the whole idea of computer and online yoga instruction has obviously become very popular over the past few years with the pandemic. And actually, there's been a lot of studies that have shown that it has some degree of efficacy. Now, the concern here is that with more intensive yoga practices, it's difficult for a yoga teacher to be able to ensure safety of practice. It is also difficult to ensure subtleties of practice and in terms of making sure that the people that are doing the practices are doing them properly because of the limited nature of Zoom interactions to be able to do this kind of thing. So in general, it is always better to have to learn yoga practice through personal instruction. And then once you go through, say, an 8-week beginner's yoga program, and you've learned all the practices and you've been supervised by a teacher and you're doing them properly and appropriately, then you can transition on your own. And there's many books and manuals and online videos of yoga practice that many of which are actually free, and you can sort of engage in a yoga practice that way. But many people find that it's important to sort of engage in a personal practice for several reasons. Number one is that it enhances your compliance. So Tuesday and Thursday nights are my yoga night. And that becomes a habit and becomes a practice, and that becomes a sustaining practice. Because many people don't have the will power to be able to maintain that discipline. The other advantage to a group yoga class is exactly that, it's a group. And so there's the added social advantage. And I can tell you from personal experience that doing a yoga class in a group setting is much more powerful than doing yoga alone. So there's the added social interaction that comes from working together in a group setting. So there's many reasons why doing yoga in person with an instructor is superior to doing it. However, under circumstances like a pandemic where these are not appropriate or available, someone doesn't have access to a yoga class, etc., then of course, the virtual online option is still available, especially with chair yoga, which tends to be fairly benign. It's fairly difficult to hurt yourself doing the kind of postures and exercises we do in chair yoga.
Thank you, Dr. Khalsa, for that. I think, did that answer your question, Rose?
Thank you for that. All of the above. I am a lifetime member of a yoga center that's right down the block from me. For a good 30 years ago, I studied and joined there. But 30 years ago, I was 50, and it's kind of more difficult to get around, and I think they're closed now for the pandemic. Anyway, that's the situation I'm with. But this presentation has inspired me to pick up with it again, because I am in need of routine, regular exercise, so to speak, you know, the whole performance level. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Rose, for asking that question. I would just, hasten to add that as we say at VaYU Shakti, the goal of yoga is not just the physical wellness, but we look at it on 5 different dimensions, which Dr. Khalsa mentioned in his talk as well. So it's physical, mental, emotional, social, and spiritual. So the group sessions, adding in the social dimension of it, and I think that's a fairly important benefit. Ramki, would you want to add something from the perspective of the VaYU Shakti offerings, and how someone like Rose can take advantage of in-person, virtual, as well as the hybrid options that are available?
Saurabh, my suggestion is, you reach out to Rose separately, and we will use this platform for general questions.
Okay,
that
would be
Rose, you can, drop your email with Saurabh or Lalita. They will reach out and we can have a private conversation. But be assured that you can get a very good service wherever you are. Go ahead, Saurabh, please.
Thank you. So, I don't see any more questions in the chat. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hands and unmute yourself, or put your questions in the chat, and we will definitely answer those questions. So let me go to a couple of questions that we have got through the emails survey that we did before the talk. So Dr. Khalsa, one of the questions that I find personally very intriguing is that in your own research and your own personal experience, have you come across examples of older adults who have been able to reverse chronic diseases using yoga?
I have not, that's not been my area of research. I have not worked with the elderly per se, and I'm also not a clinician. So, and I'm also not doing as much, very much teaching. I'm a certified yoga teacher, but I don't teach much. And when I do teach, it's usually to middle-aged populations. So I don't have, examples of that. I can talk about myself. I'm elderly. I'm 70 years old. That counts, I think. I practice yoga, 4 times a week. I play street hockey 3 times a week, and I play racquetball twice a week. So I'm very active, and I'm chasing 30-year-olds around these courts, and I'm the only one. And the next people down from me are in their 40s, and so they are all amazed that I'm able to maintain that level of functionality and aerobic fitness, and I attribute a lot of that to the benefits of yoga, to improve all those physical and mental functions that allow me to do this kind of activity.
Sounds great. Thank you. And I can vouch for the cognitive abilities as well. So no, thank you. I do see another question in the chat from Neelam. How an elderly should efficiently deal with a mental health patient in a family?
Well, that's very much a clinical question, and I'm certainly not able to address that fully. But obviously, you need to have, as soon as you see signs of any kind of mood disturbance, such as depression or anxiety, this needs to be evaluated immediately. And this can be evaluated by a social worker or a clinical psychologist very quickly. And the earlier you intervene in these kinds of conditions, I think the better you are, because you stand a chance of preventing further decline and impairment due to these disorders.
Thank you. Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. The next question, I think, probably will go to you, Ramki, because it talks about, I think it is referring to the VaYU Shakti programs, because the question is, do you guarantee results? I think it could be looked upon as a generic question for yoga as well, that does yoga guarantee results? But I think it's probably more suited for the VaYU Shakti program. So why don't you take it up if you could?
See, all along, Dr. Khalsa has been talking about results and numbers. Okay, so what we do is we take the best of yoga practices, the best of nutrition practices. Incidentally, Lalita is a very accomplished, certified nutrition teacher. So we combine both along with some cognitive games and even incorporate things like Natya yoga. It's a kind of a dance form of a yoga to give that holistic 360-degree output. So recently, we completed a program with one of our customers, and we conducted the data research, and we could see a substantial improvement in terms of results. So that's what we do. The answer is, in a nutshell, yes, we can show a substantial progress with yoga and meditation.
Thank you. Dr. Khalsa, would you like to chime in from a generic yoga perspective? Does yoga guarantee results?
Well, certainly. I mean, I think I know this from interactions with other people who are yoga practitioners, and it really is an ideal way to maintain health and prevent disease.
Absolutely. Thank you. That makes a lot of
If I
sense.
may kindly, I just wanted to intervene about the nutritional aspects that Ramki was eliciting. And Dr. Khalsa, this is not a question, but I just would like you to kind of add a comment there in specifics to the research that's been done. Are there any specific studies that shows the combination of food being an integral part or as a medicine combined with yoga, that how that, the combination is double or increased in terms of reducing the comorbidities with non-communicable diseases like diabetes, hypertension, and the likes of those?
Well, I'll say two things to that. One is that we don't have such studies that have looked at what we would call a yoga lifestyle, because many people who adopt a yoga lifestyle do adopt a substantial change in the dietary intake. They become vegetarian typically, and that's most of the common diet associated with yoga practice. But we don't have the evidence on that as to whether adding yoga, dietary changes will facilitate. Obviously that makes sense that it would, because dietary patterns are an important risk factor for non-communicable diseases. So eating processed foods, eating, fried foods, heavily processed foods, eating lots of refined foods and sugars, are major risk factors for impairing health and serving as a risk factor for many diseases, including cancer. I mean, 50% of cancer is preventable. The other thing that I would say is that yoga has an impact on dietary behavior. And that impact comes through its increase in mind-body awareness. And it comes very simply. The more you become sensitive to your body, you become more sensitive to what you do with your body. And so we have in the general population a low level of mind-body awareness overall. The sense of interoception, the experience of how your body is and how your body responds to things is very low. When you begin to practice yoga, you become more sensitive. You become more in tune with your body. And suddenly things that you did before, which were fine and you didn't notice anything, now become disturbingly unpleasant. And other things that you did before that you were supposed to do that were good for you, you didn't really experience as that enjoyable. And now you're finding them very enjoyable. That shift, that change in mind-body awareness changes your sensitivity to your own behavior, which then starts to regulate your behavior. So if you were previously smoking cigarettes and you did an 8-week yoga course and then you smoked a cigarette again, you would notice suddenly that cigarette was now feeling awful instead of pleasurable. And then you would find that before the 8-week yoga program, you used to force yourself to go to the gym for an hour workout and it was a chore. And now you go to the gym and you have that hour workout and you notice the very positive feelings that you have. So those experiences coming from increased mind-body awareness will facilitate a behavior change. They will encourage people to want to have the good feelings of doing good things by eating good foods and getting physical activity, and away from negative behaviors like eating junk food and sitting on the couch all day long. So this is the way that behavior can be changed. And behavior, of course, is the major factor underlying lifestyle diseases. These non-communicable diseases are lifestyle diseases. They're due to lifestyle behaviors, and yoga can change behavior.
Thank you so much, Dr. Khalsa.
Thanks a lot. That was a great answer. And we at VaYU Shakti obviously totally believe in combining yoga, nutrition, and a lifestyle coaching to ensure that you are not only getting benefits out of your yoga sessions, but you are also making long-term changes to your habits, to your thinking process, to your general how you generally live your life, and get better, not just today but tomorrow and for the rest of your life. So I think that's an important aspect of it. Dr. Khalsa and Ramki, I have one more question where actually I would like both of you to come in from different angles. Dr. Khalsa from a generic yoga perspective, and Ramki, you from a more VaYU Shakti perspective. But the question is, how do you match up or incorporate all the modern technology that is becoming more and more a fad and very well adopted when it comes to evaluating and tracking different health parameters, and probably use them in a more of a positive feedback loop kind of a thing. So both of you, whoever wants to go first.
Dr. Khalsa, you can go first, sir.
Sure. I mean, I think a lot of these, there's these fitness metrics that are now becoming very popular, wrist-worn fit metrics. I mean, I think they can be useful for people. But I personally have never been a fan of devices. Back in the 70s when I began practicing yoga, the field of biofeedback was developing. And I remember fellow yoga students saying, oh, well, we don't have to do yoga anymore. We've got biofeedback. We can automatically create meditation with biofeedback. Well, these things never really pan out that way. And I've always been a traditionalist in terms of approaching this. The changes that you are able to do by yourself with your own behavioral practices are the best way to interact with your own body, because then it's a learned skill. You're not dependent upon a device. You're dependent upon your own internal resources to be able to maintain your health and maintain your wellness. And I think that to me has always been the most valuable. That's not to say I'm against these devices. I think they can be a gimmick that can help people get engaged. But overall, and eventually, we need to see this increase in mind-body awareness that's so critical to behavior change.
With your permission, Dr. Khalsa, I have a few more words to add. To me, these gadgets are just an alert machines. They are IoTs. Basically, it helps us gather some information. Like, for example, wearing a watch which captures the heart rate. If my heart rate is going for outside the acceptable window, it basically alerts me. So when it alerts me, it gives me an opportunity to slow down, probably take few pranayama breaths and control myself. So gadgets like this are kind of a supportive tool, and but the core remains the same. End of the day, you have to do yoga and to be healthy. That's my perception, sir.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. I think like Dr. Khalsa said, that the mind-body awareness. I think the more you do yoga, the more you are aware of your own body, of your own mind and your environment. And the more you do so, I think the task that you are outsourcing to these gadgets probably can be done by your own by your own body and mind. So that does make a lot of sense. Thank you. And I see some of the reactions in the audience as well. So while we are going through these questions that we got through the survey, I would still invite people on the live chat to either input your questions in the chat or raise your hands and unmute yourself and talk about your question if you need to.
I think we do have one more person. I'm not sure if you were able to see this. Linnell Herzer has a question.
Oh, sure. Yes. Thank you. So There's a little bit of appreciation out there. Dr. Khalsa, thanks for your work. Can you share the names of any researchers who are actively looking at yoga in reversing medical conditions of aging and mood disorders?
Yeah, so I mean, the best way to access this, I'm familiar with some of them, personally as colleagues, but the best way to access this is to go onto the website PubMed, PUBMED. This is the government's website database for all published research on, biomedicine. And if you type in the word yoga, you'll obviously get many hits. And if you type in the word yoga and elderly and a specific disorder that you're interested in, you'll have a number of hits. And what's provided on that website in those hits is the abstracts, and you can read the conclusions of the studies. You also have information giving the names of the authors, their institutions, their locations. So it's a full way to really access this information. In some cases, you can actually access the full paper for free. Otherwise, you can email the author of that study and develop a connection or ask questions. And if you're lucky, they'll reply to you. But that is the resource that I use every day as a researcher to become familiar with what's been published and who's doing what in one particular area. And so if you're interested in yoga for depression in the elderly, you just put in yoga depression elderly into PubMed, and you'll get a number of papers. And the ones that you can probably gravitate to are the ones that are review papers, which then summarize the reviews, the studies that have been done. And as I mentioned at the end of my talk, the Yoga Alliance website, we have actually curated a number of review papers and put them there for you to be able to access. And these are free access websites, and you can go and look at click on the links. But really, I curated all those papers from PubMed. So you can go to the source of PubMed, or you can go to the Yoga Alliance website to look specifically at the elderly papers.
Awesome. Great. I have a couple of questions, Dr. Khalsa, which sort of, to me, seem to be similar kind of questions. So maybe I'll group them together and ask you them together. There are many of our older adult care administratives here in this audience and through the survey. But there was a question about the compliance. How do we improve the compliance with a yoga practice or a yoga session when everyone is so busy and distracted with many demands of life? And then there was another question which sort of seems similar to me, which says, we do talk about the 8 limbs of yoga and the holistic practice and stuff like that. Not just the physical portion of it. How important is it to incorporate all of these different aspects of yoga in the practice? Is it better for older adults to keep it the whole thing simple rather than trying to incorporate all of these different aspects?
I think the 4 most important aspects are the ones that I've highlighted, and these are the 4 aspects that are included in virtually all of the research studies that have been done: the postures, the exercise, the deep relaxation practices, the regulation of breath, especially slow breathing practices, and very importantly, the meditative component. All 4 of these are very simple. They are already very, very simple. The more of them you do, the more benefit you get. If you do nothing but meditation, that's great. You'll get the benefits of meditation. But if you add breathing, if you add relaxation, if you add physical postures and exercises, you're going to increase your benefits simply because you're doing more things that provide benefit. So that, I think, is critical. In terms of compliance, this is the fatal weakness of any kind of behavioral intervention, whether it's aerobic exercise or diet. If you don't do the things, they won't work. You actually have to put in the effort to do these things. And unfortunately, we live in a medical system in which that has been subverted. In our modern medical system, the doctor is supposed to be the one that takes care of you. So you have a symptom, you go to the doctor gives you a pill or a surgery, and you go home. And if the doctor happens to say, well, you need to change your diet, the patient says, no, I don't want to do anything to change. I don't have to change. That's your responsibility. You give me the pill to take care of it. And that kind of a medical system where the emphasis is on the physician and not on the patient is prone to an epidemic of non-communicable disease, which is exactly what we have. So the patient has to take responsibility for his or her life. We take responsibility for our cars. You go in every 6 months, you get an oil change. If you don't get an oil change, the engine's going to drop out. Your car's going to fail. we need to take care of our bodies in the same way. And our bodies require proper diet, proper exercise, proper mental functioning. And that's what yoga does. It provides those types of practices. So in terms of maintaining compliance, all you can do is just ensure that everything is done to enhance compliance. Have a good teacher. A bad yoga teacher is a bad yoga teacher. It's like a bad anything. You need to find a good yoga teacher with whom you resonate. You need to find a yoga practice that works for you. There are many, many, many different yoga teachers and many different yoga styles. You need to find what works for you. To go down to the street, take one yoga class from the local studio and find that it's unpleasant and then say, I tried yoga, it doesn't work, is not an accurate statement. You try yoga when you try many different teachers and many different styles until you find one that fits for you. Then you can say, I have tried yoga. And what likely happens is that you resonate with that style of yoga and with that teacher, and that resonance means that you have a good experience, and that good experience enhances compliance. And compliance is what it's all about. It's practice, practice, practice.
Wow, well said. In fact, on that note, Ramki, if I could, I would like to bring you in to talk a little bit about how VaYU Shakti, is conducting its sessions, and how VaYU Shakti is able to improve compliance through its innovative and entertaining methods of delivering yoga. And while you are doing so, I would also like to club that with another question that you might want to answer in the same vein, which is, why are you a little bit more expensive than some other yoga teachers?
Let me take the second question first. At least in VaYU Shakti, we don't deny yoga for price. Yeah.
Okay.
So if somebody has a limited budget, we see how we can, adjust our pricing to meet within their budget. That goes without saying. But price is a very relative term. We have research happening, and we have so much of continuous product development that is happening. We are just not only giving the Ashtanga yoga, the 8 elements of yoga. We are also including social elements. We are also including emotional elements. We are also including the nutrition elements. We are also including, other components. So this all takes a typical yoga teacher will charge anywhere between $75 to $100. But in our case, we actually charge only for those components. Technically speaking, we are economical. But when you see as a whole program, they teach just the yoga, the physical aspect, that is asanas. But we do, breathing, regulated breathing, we do mindfulness, we do the entire aspects of yoga, plus nutrition, plus the other social components. So all these things require certified experts. So when you all put together, so per hour, if you see, or, per session, if you see, we are actually much more economical than the one-on-one teacher. In addition to that, there is continuity. You are dealing with an organization. You are not dealing with an individual. The individual has limitations. As an organization, we have a bandwidth. That is as far as expensive aspect is concerned. In terms of personalization, the whole purpose of VaYU Shakti is, we believe that everyone is unique. I am different few months back, few weeks back, I'm different now. And I need to practice something that I need at this point in time. So it's an extremely personalized process. So we start with the baseline measurement and keep evaluating that individual on a periodic basis. Typically, we call it a mandala, which is 48 days. Typically, about once in 2 months, we evaluate the person and see how he is progressing. Hope I have answered your question.
Thank you. That sounds awesome. I have a couple of comments in the chat that I would like to verbalize. There's a comment from Linnell, which I find very very appropriate. The movement or shifting away from medication management to meditation management. That's great.
I think, Saurav, you should ask her to talk instead of, you facilitating. That would make it a little easier for others. also.
Absolutely, yeah. Please, Linel, if you want to, unmute yourself and talk, we'd love to do that.
I was just echoing, there's so much awareness on how we take care of our health related to calling the doctor. But I really appreciate the self-awareness, the increase in the mindful self-awareness is in terms of not diagnosing, but just awareness of what's happening in our bodies and awareness of what makes us feel good, awareness of when we're not feeling well, and the choices that we can make and how we can uplift that for our seniors, especially. Really appreciate this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Linel. I also see a couple of comments from Karen. Karen, if you would like to unmute yourself and talk, I think that would be awesome.
Thank you. Yes, I'm also echoing the sentiments shared here that we often are called to fix things that an easy fix, a quick fix. And the truth is, as someone who's been practicing yoga personally, it has been a privilege for me to be able to offer and invite people into the conversation around mindfulness and holistic well-being, and very much echoing what Dr. Khalsa has shared today. And I thank you so much for that, because it affirms my experience personally, and it validates what I share with my clients on a daily basis. So I thank you very much. It feels good to be in good company. Thank you.
Well, this is the field of integrative medicine, and that's what integrative medicine is all about. It's the responsibility of patients to be involved in their own health. It's also part of the field of behavioral medicine, of mind-body medicine, which all share this sort of holistic approach that the patient needs to be involved, that lifestyle is critical and important. And this whole idea, the example of the diabetic patient who refuses to change diet and refuses to deal with stress and just wants more pills, it's not going to work. You cannot treat an epidemic of metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes with a pill. It's not going to happen. You're not going to succeed. That's where we're at, unfortunately, in our medical system, and that's why the medical system is so overburdened, because these surgicals and pharmaceuticals are costing enormous amounts of money, and yet the problem is lifestyle, and yet we're not addressing the underlying cause. So that's really the problem. I mean, the analogy I like to use is that, you've got a tree in your front yard, and the tree is starting to turn brown in the middle of summer and lose its leaves, and so you go out and buy a can of green spray paint and spray the leaves, and you're done. You've treated the symptoms. But really, it's you have to call an arborist and find out what the underlying cause is and deal with that. And that's what we're not doing in modern medicine. We don't have time for that. The doctor doesn't have time for that. You have insomnia, let me give you a pill. And worse than that now, of course, if you watch any television at all, is these insane pharmaceutical commercials, one after another, showing these healthy people because they took pills. It's a myth, and it really is a disservice to the public that this is now happening, because it just ensconces this attitude and this relationship to our health that it's all about pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
Can I add one thing to that, is the socioeconomic angle of this. And I really appreciate that there's a sliding scale with you all, because our seniors can go to the doctor for free, but they sometimes can't afford a yoga class.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's a crazy part of it, that the preventive aspect of our health is gotten very, there's a our capitalist society has made it kind of difficult for some people to access. And so I think that that's another arena that at the macro level needs to be addressed. I guess that's another workshop, but just wanted to add that too. I also want to say one more thing. I recently got an my doctor said, do you want to speak to a functional doctor? And I said, well, of course, aren't they all functional? Is that a thing? I'm like, what? Yes, I would like to speak to a doctor that's interested in my functioning. It was fascinating to me. I'm like, really? Are we that siloed in our medical system that it's...
Well, that's actually a good thing. That's functional medicine, which is, very relevant to integrative and holistic medicine. It's actually a field of medicine which is actually very integrative in its approaches.
Very cool. Yeah, a pill for every ill kind of. Yeah, please, Karen, go ahead.
You look good.
Karen, you had a... Okay.
And I did want to add, Saurabh, that the other thing that we certainly would like to throw light on is providing care to the care providers. We see so many people out here today who are in this avenue of the elder care market, providing care to the elder care population. And while we're doing so, if they have still not, officially categorized as a senior, or they're approaching that particular category, I think it is so important to keep their life at stake and to take care of their health. And that is what we're able to provide with VaYU Shakti. Providing care to the care providers, that's another featured program that I certainly would like to throw some light on, where we do have very accommodative and very supportive and very approachable programs that you can utilize while we're providing that to your elders or the seniors at your centers. So we do have a very well-packaged complementary program that can align very well with what we're providing to the elders too. So just like Dr. Khalsa said, you don't want to paint your tree that's falling with all the leaves just green, but go back to the roots to find out. And if you can do that much early on, before you know that these chronic conditions are going to affect you, or the non-communicable diseases are going to get to you pretty soon, if you're able to already be proactive and ahead of the curve, I think you're going to certainly bring in a wonderful aging population into the community.
Great point. Thank you. Go ahead, Karen.
Thank you. And I apologize. I'm in a hospital setting right now. So my personal and professional life converges sometimes. So everything is fine, except I just had to put myself in a place where I could speak. I love the reference to the tree, because in Ram Dass's book, Still Here, he talks about the futile attempt of painting he said, trying to reverse aging is like running around in the fall and trying to paint the beautiful leaves that are turning orange and yellow and red, trying to paint them green again, and how futile and what it does to us as humans to be and to put ourselves in such a vicious cycle. And Lynn, you mentioned you're in the entertainment, you're working with people who perhaps were in the entertainment, if I read that correctly in your chat comment. And I thought, I can only imagine, I work with a demographic that's aging in the, if you will, middle to upper middle class socioeconomic levels, dealing with all the challenges of aging that come up for most people. And I'm in a fortunate position to accept insurance so they can afford to address their mental health. And then as an addition to that, I feel fortunate to bring in this component of yoga, of mindfulness, of the reminder. And sometimes it's not a reminder, it's actually news to them that we have a choice of how we respond to life, that it's not happening to us or at us, that it is happening. And through my yoga practice, I've learned to be able to take that pause to respond. And so I just wanted to thank you again for everything that's being shared here. It feels really nice. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you. Thanks all for all the comments in the chat box, and you guys coming on the video and talking about it. As we are nearing towards the end of this talk, I know that this has been the theme and the topic of this talk primarily, but I still cannot help bring it up because there are many people who have asked for it, also in our interactions outside of this survey and the talk. And the question has been that, are these practices, and specifically the VaYU Shakti programs, are these evidence-based? And I know that we have talked about evidence throughout the talk, but I just want to bring it up once more and let both of you, Dr. Khalsa and Ramki, maybe just readdress that question, that are these practices evidence-based? Are they scientific? And how should the caregivers and the policy makers and the administrators should look at these?
I would say in general that you can call these practices evidence-based. It depends upon how specific you're wanting to get. If you want to make the claim that yoga for Parkinson's disease is evidence-based, that's the data is a little bit thinner. But if you're talking about risk factors like yoga for stress, yoga for emotion regulation, yoga for mindfulness, you can say that yes, in general, these practices are evidence-based. It also becomes problematic if you really want to get very, very specific about a specific yoga practice. We're talking in generalities here from the summary of the research and the review of the literature. These are many different yoga type practices that have been studied. And so we're just taking a little bit of a general license here in the fact that most of these practices have incorporated those 4 components. And so that gives us some confidence that in general, these 4 components delivered in a yoga practice will provide benefit. The other thing that you can also have confidence in is that there's a whole field of meditation research and mindfulness research that is done that's parallel to all of this and done in yoga. There are benefits to just mindfulness and meditation alone. So when you add, these practices, add to these practices the physical relaxation, the breathing techniques, and the physical postures and exercises, you're adding more. So you can be fairly confident to say that yes, in general, these practices are evidence-based for the most important types of things that we're concerned with, which is the risk factors for disease and the quality of life and the sense of wellness.
Sara, the answer from my side is, I don't have to add anything more because, sorry?
Go ahead, please.
And Dr. Khalsa, thoroughly covered the topic. But still, from a compliance perspective, some of the organizations who are delivering services to the elders, they need a certificate from the authorities. So from VaYU Shakti perspective, we are applying to NCOA. The work is already started, and we should get it for at least for the major ones, primarily mental health, meditation, stress reduction, anxiety, depression, fall prevention. So these are the areas are on a first priority. Okay, and interactions are happening with NCOA.
Great, that sounds great. So I think with that, we have covered most of the major questions that we had, and we are just 4 minutes short of 11:30. So I would once again invite, if anybody has any comments, please feel free to unmute yourself, come on video. The floor is open for everyone, and then we would move towards. I would hand it over to Lalita for closing.
I have a question. I want to request Dr. Khalsa to say a few words. Dr. Khalsa, we are extremely, as a group, focused towards servicing the elders, the older community. What advice do you have for us, please?
In terms of?
How we should take care of ourselves to ensure that we are servicing the elders, the elders very well.
Well, I think it's important to make yoga accessible, number one. And that means it has to be local, it has to be there, it has to be marketed, and it has to be financially feasible. And that's important. And the second thing I would say is education, because and this is a responsibility that falls on the yoga community, because the reputation of yoga has come in 2 extremes, both of which are completely false. One is that yoga is just for thin, rich, white women in leotards, which is covered on the magazine covers. And so the elderly will look at this and say, well, I'm not thin and I'm not a woman and I'm not young, so I can't do yoga. And the other extreme is that, oh, yoga comes from India. It's part of the Hindu religion. If you take yoga, you have to become a Hindu, or it's against my religious practices. And that's false, because yoga is not a belief system. It's a mind-body practice. It has no belief whatsoever. If you choose to use mantras or not use mantras, it doesn't matter whether they're Sanskrit or not. You can use English mantras. It has the same meditative effect. So these two extremes are problematic, and they are common in terms of being barriers to the elderly and other populations in their willingness to adopt yoga or try yoga.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Dr. Khalsa. Over to you, Saurav.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, so we are just 1 minute away. Unless somebody has a specific comment that they want to make, I would like to hand it over to Lalita to start moving towards closing.
Well, thank you so much, Saurabh, and thank you very much, Dr. Khalsa. I think that hour-and-a-half session was indeed intriguing, impactful, and very informative. We certainly have to bid our goodbyes for now, but I would like to say that, we've had a very, very wonderful session, and we would like to extend our heartfelt thanks, first of all, to DFTA, our Honorable Counsel General Randhir Jaiswal, and Dr. Khalsa, who's been our featured speaker for the day, and all of the attendees who have participated in this webinar, contributed to the webinar, made it very interactive with all the questions. We really, really appreciate your time here. The session for today, just for your information, has been recorded, and we will share the recording with those of you who were not physically present here. Please do share it with your friends, your family, your colleagues, because it's certainly one of a kind that we would like to, deliver to the people with evidence about how yoga is real science that works for you in so many different levels. And also feel free to reach out to us with any more questions. You do have our website address, which is vayushakti.yoga. So please visit our website for ongoing information. We are on a roll here to bring in more webinars, more education, as Dr. Khalsa rightly said. If we have to reach to the right people, we also have to voice out our education in the right manner. And that's definitely an ongoing process for us. So we will be working, and we are in pursuit to bring better quality of life for the older adults and for the rest of the people around us, make this community a beautiful place to live, a safe place to live, and a healthy place to live. Once again, thank you very much from VaYU Shakti, and have a blessed day and have a safe day, all of you.